Number 7. Prentice Robinson. North Carolina man Prentice Robinson stopped at the Wingate police station on February the 26th of 2018 to file an official report that his cell phone had been stolen. Shortly after leaving the station, the 55-year-old, who was streaming his walk home on Facebook Live, was suddenly approached by an armed man. Robinson notified the individual positioned off camera that he was recording, repeatedly saying, "You on live." Nevertheless, the assailant proceeded to fire 4 gunshots, after which Robinson collapsed to the ground, along with the selfie stick he'd been using to record himself. The disturbing video clip was later removed from Facebook, which explained its decision in a public statement, stating that the company could never know if Robinson would have wanted this horrific act to be live streamed on his profile. As was later detailed by the Wingate police chief, the suspect had been wearing blue jeans, brown Timberland-style boots, and a black and blue windbreaker at the time of the deadly incident. The shooter was ultimately identified as 65-year-old Douglas Cleveland Colson, who turned himself into the authorities the following day. It subsequently emerged that Robinson had become well known in the community for his Facebook Live videos, which he'd used to highlight illicit neighborhood activities such as drug dealing. While the police didn't specify what they believed to be Colson's motive for the killing, it was theorized that members of Wingate's criminal element sought to eliminate Robinson because of his investigative social media videos. Number 6. Raheem Murray. Dramatic surveillance footage taken from the 4300 block of 3rd Street Southeast in Washington, D.C. captured 2 gunmen opening fire on a group of people that included a pair of young children. In the moments leading up to the shooting, the 2 kids hopped out of a vehicle and began approaching 3 men standing idly on the sidewalk. Shortly thereafter, the assailants emerged from a Honda sedan that had come to a screeching halt in front of the unsuspecting pedestrians. They fired multiple rifle shots into the crowd, prompting a bystander to swoop up the children and flee the scene on foot. The 3 men immediately fell to the ground after having sustained several non-fatal gunshot wounds. However, one of the victims, later identified as Raheem Murray, was ultimately killed after one of the gunmen had walked over to him and fired a single round into his head at point-blank range. Before fleeing in the Honda, detectives reviewed the video recording of the incident, which had occurred on Super Bowl Sunday 2020, for several months before they finally identified Murray's killer as 26-year-old Glenn Dolford. The latter was reported as having an extensive criminal record that included convictions on charges of assaulting a police officer, as well as weapons-related offenses. Subsequent reports indicated that Dolford was expected to be indicted on first-degree murder charges in early 2022. Number 5. Sean Walker. In the evening hours of June the 27th of 2019, Ohio teen Sean Walker was fatally shot several times at point-blank range at a home in the 400 block of East Avenue in Hamilton. The incident was caught on video, which investigators subsequently used to identify their prime suspect as 17-year-old Michael Smith Jr. Immediately following the shooting, Smith had allegedly concealed the murder weapon in his clothes before disposing of it in a nearby sewer. Upon being taken into custody in early July, he reportedly faced charges of murder with a gun specification and tampering with evidence. It emerged following Smith's arrest that despite his relatively young age, he'd already racked up a fairly extensive record in the juvenile court system. The accused teen had previously served 2 months in a detention center after being convicted of inducing panic, as well as 3 counts of assault. 3 years later, Smith was charged with aggravated menacing, for which he spent about a month behind bars. Then, less than a month prior to the murder, Smith had committed a probation violation, whereupon he was ordered to perform 12 hours of community service. In August of 2020, the teenager pled guilty to the charges levied against him in connection to Walker's brutal slaying for which it was reported he'd be tried as an adult. Smith was ultimately sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 16 years. Number 4. Chesley Patterson. The police in Baltimore, Maryland, responded to the scene of a reported shooting in the early morning hours of January the 24th of 2022. Officers reportedly came upon a gunshot victim identified as 44-year-old Chesley Patterson at the intersection of Eastern Avenue and South Broadway in the neighborhood of Fells Point. The man was taken to Johns Hopkins Hospital, where he was ultimately pronounced dead. During the ensuing investigation, it was discovered that Patterson, the beloved manager at La Scala Ristorante Italiano in Little Italy, had just closed up shop and was on his way home when the shooting occurred. At approximately 1 a.m., the man had reportedly gone into a liquor store before emerging with items he'd purchased, which he then put into the trunk of his car. Upon getting back in the driver's seat, Patterson was accosted by a man who'd blocked his car into its parking spot with a gold minivan. Following a brief physical struggle, the assailant brandished a gun and fired a single round into Patterson before fleeing the scene. Homicide detectives used surveillance footage of the incident to identify Samuel Wise as the individual in the gold minivan, which he'd used during a Fells Point crime spree that involved 2 other robberies earlier that night. He was consequently taken into police custody on several charges, including first-degree murder, armed robbery, and assault. In the wake of his death, Patterson was honored by members of the Little Italy community, including the owner of La Scala Ristorante Italiano, who said that he was more than an employee, he was a family member. Number 3. Chad Reed. Shortly before 4:30 p.m. on November the 5th of 2021, the police in Lubbock, Texas, were dispatched to the 2100 block of 90th Street after receiving reports of a shooting on the premises. Upon their arrival, officers found the gunshot victim, identified as 54-year-old Chad Reed, in critical condition. The man ultimately passed away from his injuries. Following a preliminary homicide investigation, it was determined that Reed had been shot during an argument with William Kyle Carruth. The heated confrontation had reportedly stemmed from a custody dispute involving Reed's children and his ex-wife, whom Carruth was dating at the time. As tensions between the two men escalated, Carruth retrieved a firearm from inside his home, which he then used to gun Reed down on the front porch. Although the incident appeared to have simply been a domestic dispute turned violent, news of Reed's death ultimately made national headlines after his widow, Jennifer, publicly released a cell phone video clip of the shooting. The footage, which spread rapidly on social media, showed Reed and Carruth engaged in a contentious shouting match that culminated with the latter firing his weapon. The video appeared as though it had confirmed the findings of the police's investigation, and many subsequently called for Carruth to be charged with Reed's murder. However, shortly after Jennifer released her footage of the incident, Carruth's attorney released a video of the argument that had been taken from a different perspective. This alternate view of the shooting showed Reed getting into Carruth's face and appearing to threaten him. Jennifer eventually filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Carruth, accusing him and his girlfriend of conspiring to kill her late husband. Carruth denied the allegations, however, and claimed to have shot the man in self-defense. In March of 2022, a Lubbock County grand jury ultimately chose not to indict Carruth in connection to the fatal incident. Number 2. Xavier Antonio Johnson. In April of 2022, Florida man Xavier Antonio Johnson and his associates began renting out an Airbnb in St. Petersburg, which they allegedly used to run a marijuana trafficking operation. At about 8:30 p.m. on the 13th of the month, 2 armed individuals entered the house, purportedly to carry out a transaction of some kind with Johnson. However, a short time later, the property's Ring doorbell camera captured a trio of men carrying Johnson's lifeless body out the front door. They took the incapacitated man to a hospital in Davenport before fleeing, according to a statement made by the Polk County Sheriff. Johnson, having been shot by the men who entered his Airbnb, ultimately passed away from his injuries. The authorities were soon contacted by the owner of the Airbnb, who indicated that she'd noticed the video of Johnson being lifted out while reviewing her home security camera footage. Investigators subsequently released the video to the public and, with tips from the community, were reportedly able to identify the 3 men shown transporting the victim's body out of the house. They were also able to identify 29-year-old Justin Jenkins as one of the two armed men who'd entered the residence shortly before the shooting. He was ultimately charged with Johnson's murder, although as of the case's latest updates, the Polk County Police were still working to identify his accomplice. Number 1. Renealdo Daxa. A Filipino politician was gunned down while taking a picture of his family outside their home in Caloocan on New Year's Day 2011. Prior to his assassination, Renealdo Daxa, who was in his mid-30s at the time, had served as a councilman for Barangay 35 in Maypajo and was also a corporal in the Philippine Army Reserve Command. Moments after Daxa's camera captured his family's posed portrait, the shooter, later identified as a convicted robber out on parole, shot him once in the right forearm and once in the chest. The politician was rushed to Martinez Hospital, where he was ultimately pronounced dead. After local police launched an investigation into the incident, it emerged that the picture Daxa had taken of his wife, daughter, and mother-in-law had also captured the gunman taking aim with the murder weapon mere seconds before the fatal shots were fired. Caloocan City investigators used the chillingly timed photograph to identify the killer as Arnel Buenaflor, who was taken into custody the following week. Two of Buenaflor's suspected accomplices were also arrested in connection to the deadly shooting. During the case's ensuing court proceedings, Buenaflor claimed to have targeted Daxa in retaliation for having allegedly been shot in the head by individuals associated with the politician months earlier. Thanks for watching. Would you rather take perfectly timed pictures that always get corrupted, or have a beautiful singing voice but only when you're alone? Let us know in the comments section below.